Hello and welcome to the Paper Prototypes podcast. I'm here with my guest Paul, and today we're going to be talking about the game Thronefall. So, Paul, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and then tell me a little bit about Thronefall?
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me. So I'm Paul. I'm Berlin-based indie developer. So Berlin, that's in Germany, for those of you who don't know. And I run Grizzly Games, which is a tiny indie game studio. I mean, it's just two people, but we like to call it a studio. And yeah, our latest game is called Thronefall. So I developed that together with my buddy Jonas, who's the other half of Grizzly Games. And yeah.
And how did you
That's
guys
about.
initially meet to discuss making Thronefall?
Well, we both have been part of Grizzly Games for quite a while now. We founded the company originally in 2017. Then back then with like a different cast of people, and Jonas joined in 2018, if I remember correctly. And we met during our university studies here in Berlin. So we were both part of the game design program of the HGW. It's like a public university here in Berlin. And we actually also founded Grizzly Games as part of our studies there. Our first two games we released, Superflight and Islanders, we both created those as part of our university program. Like it was structured in a way where we basically every semester. So that's how the programs usually work here in Germany. They are split up in half years, and every semester we were creating basically a small game, and we just pretty early on set the goal for ourselves to publish those projects, and then basically just as means to publish the first project we back then founded Grizzly Games, and then we're a bit surprised by by the success of our first game we published, and then we kind of just stuck with that.
And what's it like working together with a partner? How do you manage your workflow, and what tools do you guys usually use?
Um, well, it's pretty great, especially if it's a partner that you know for a couple of years. Because in my experience, it just gets better and better because just the amount of trust and familiarity you have means that you can really be sure that the other person is doing their job without like checking in every hour. So yeah, it's a pretty good experience, and we actually work fully remote right now. So Jonas is not living in Berlin anymore, and we actually also haven't seen each other for the whole development of Thronefall. So we basically managed everything over Discord in that time. And usually, we both have a pretty all-round skill set, I'd say. So we both are able to program, and for Thronefall, we use the Unity engine. We both are pretty familiar with Unity. And then we kind of just try to split up the tasks as we go. So we usually just like pick the tasks we want to do most, and then for the tasks nobody wants to do, we just like um, assign them to whoever has time at the time they need to be done. And then when it comes to the specifics, Jonas is usually more the game design guy who takes care of the balancing details, and I, at least for Thronefall, took care of the visuals, like the 3D models, and kind of like the overall development of the art style as well.
And how is it trying to balance managing Grizzly Games as well as I saw you have your own projects? You have developed like a little skateboarding game, and I saw you're working on a snowboarding game. And Jonas developed Will You Snail, and he's managing a YouTube channel as well.
Yeah, that's true. We kind of divide our time between Grizzly Games and personal projects. And initially, I started making games on my own during a phase where we didn't really know where to take things with Grizzly Games. It was kind of at the end of our studies, and back then another friend of ours was part of Grizzly Games, Friedemann, with whom we also developed the last game, Islanders. And yeah, we didn't really we didn't really know at that time where we wanted to take things, and I was kind of like waiting for a decision on that end. So I decided, well, in the meantime, I could just try to make a game on my own, which then turned out to be the Ramp, like the little skateboarding game you mentioned. And yeah, then I realized I actually also really like making games completely alone because it allows you to, well, really just focus on the things you enjoy most, and like also making games about topics maybe other people are not interested in, like skateboarding, for example. I would have never made a skateboarding game with Grizzly Games and Jonas, for example. And yeah, then when we got back together with Grizzly Games and started developing Thronefall, we just decided to keep our schedule divided between our personal projects, which we enjoyed um, a lot as well. Like you mentioned, Jonas' YouTube channel is quite big. I think he has like 200,000 subscribers or something. Like it's really a great YouTube channel, and he loves doing that as well. So we unless we had like really stressful phases around the release, for example, we try to kind of evenly divide our schedule between Grizzly Games work and personal projects. So we usually do the first 3 days of the week, Monday to Wednesday is Grizzly Games time, and then the rest of the week we're just free to do whatever we like to do.
And what was the initial vision or inspiration behind making Thronefall?
Oh yeah, actually, the project took like quite a couple of unexpected turns. I think at least the name Thronefall actually stems from a personal project of mine, which I tried to do after the ramp, which was pretty much a complete failure. It was kind of inspired by Game of Thrones. Like I binge watched it, I think, in early 2022. I was really late to the party, but anyway, I was so obsessed with it that I kind of wanted to make a game set in this whole like in this fantasy of having several kind of kingdoms that struggle for power in a world, and it was kind of a high level strategy game that was supposed to be focused on the relationship between the characters and stuff. I don't know, it was like a terrible idea, and it didn't work out at all. But for some reason, when we then started the ideation for the next game, I managed to talk Jonas into this idea, and then we, for some reason, also decided to make a card game out of it. And then we started prototyping that, and that was just failure. Like it was no fun at all. We were like a couple of months into the project, and then at some point we just realized it's not going anywhere. Like it's just a terrible, terrible idea. And then we kind of tried to save the day, and we decided to just grab everything gameplay related. So we basically just threw everything in the bin, and the only thing we wanted to keep was this kind of idea of managing and growing your kingdom, and the title. We kept that as well, and then we just went back to the drawing board and just tried different ideas that catered to this fantasy. Well, yeah, and then at some point we just ended up with the mechanics for Thronefall, which were heavily inspired by the Kingdom series. Like this, I don't know if you played it, but it's a fantastic side scroller, which kind of has like very similar core mechanics to Thronefall.
You know, I got the vibe. I was like, I feel like I've seen this somewhere. I just don't remember where. And now that you mentioned kingdoms, I'm like, it's all coming together. So,
Yeah, it's a great game. go play it if you haven't.
What was one of the things that caught me a little off guard while playing Thronefall was everything seems to revolve around like primarily one button. Um, was that something you had intended going into the game to keep your I guess control simple, or did that just develop organically?
That is definitely intentional. It's a kind of design philosophy that you can find in all our projects, and it has mostly to do with accessibility. We always try to make the games we create as accessible to everyone as possible. So we really, in the like ideal scenario, everybody should be able to have fun with the game, even people that are not very familiar with more complex games. And that was also like the idea behind Thronefall, to take the classic strategy game genre and then strip it down to something that is very easy to access. So that was definitely intentional. And then also with Thronefall being our third project, we were able to gather quite some experience with porting games to other platforms with our previous projects. So also there we figured, well, if we keep the controls intentionally simple, then we basically are free to very easily port the game to any other platform. It will run on mobile then, it will work on consoles. So that was the second idea behind very simple controls, just keep it very flexible platform-wise.
Is there any lore reason as to what's going on in the world of Thronefall, or any plans to do something like that, or are you planning to keep things just very simple and almost arcadey?
Sorry, any what reason?
Like lore reasons, story, anything like that?
Oh, yeah, there are definitely plans to kind of fill the gaps there, but we're also definitely going to try to strike a balance between keeping everything arcadey and easy to get into, like that there won't be massive cutscenes or walls of text you have to read between your levels. But it's something we heard a lot from the community, and also something we would like to try to maybe build a little bit more for an actual world around the things that happen in Thronefall. But well, we also got to see how much time we have for that. So I cannot confirm it for sure, but it's definitely something we like to explore more towards the end of the early access period.
Thronefall. It's hard. How do I phrase this next question? Scoring seems to be a really important aspect when playing Thronefall. What are all the aspects in the game that contribute to the player getting a good score between each wave?
Well, basically, the score for each night consists out of three parts, if I'm not mistaken. There is the base score you get for every night, and I believe that might be depending on the specific wave. I'm not totally sure about that. That's something Jonas did at some point, and I haven't paid that close attention to the score since then. But there is like the base score you get no matter what for just surviving the night, and then there are two other dynamic score components. First one is time. So the quicker you manage to fend off the enemies, the more score you will get. And the second one is how well you were able to protect your kingdom. So that's basically how many buildings are still intact after the night.
How did you find out that those were the things you wanted the players to focus on for scoring, as well as the individual values that come for the score?
Um, well, I think we wanted to give players the opportunity to like we wanted to make different strategies and exploring with different ways to play the game equally fun and equally worthwhile. So we knew from experience that there always are players that like to do the speed run kind of thing, that just like a timed challenge. So you can go for that if you try to just like win the night as fast as possible. But we also wanted to make room for other strategies. So if you want to be very, very careful and make sure that everyone is really protected, which also kind of like fits nicely into the fantasy, I'd say. You can also play the game in that way. I think that was pretty much the idea behind that. And how Jonas came up with the specific numbers for that I cannot say for sure. But I guess he just usually it's a trial and error process, just like playing it over and over again, and then fine tune the different values.
And how do you determine what enemies are going to appear in each wave?
Well, we obviously try to make the waves more and more dangerous as the game progresses. And then we also have like a certain theme for every level. So with every new map we introduce to the world, to the game, we also try to introduce one or several new enemy types that are kind of like the overall theme then for the map. So for example, on the second map, the desert one, we first introduce riding enemies like those monster riders. Or on the third map, the ice one, there are a lot of those very tiny there are like those swarms of little tiny slime creatures. And then usually there is also it kind of fits together with the new weapon you unlock. So the enemies in the second level can be fought very efficiently with the spear, which you unlock after the bow, because the spear is able to slow fast enemies down, and the monster riders are pretty fast units. So that's usually how it goes. We try to come up with new enemy types, and then also with a kind of weapon or other defenses that kind of synergize with that.
And how do you come up with the various enemies for Thronefall? Is it like you try to create an enemy that fits a mechanical niche, or do you just have a cool idea or make a fun monster and try to fit it somewhere?
It's usually mechanics first, I'd say, because, well, especially with the simple art style we have, and also with the absence of any lore, we are kind of free to do to do everything we like to. And I think the fun gameplay is definitely the topmost priority here. So usually it's us, or mostly Jonas, as he does more of the game design part, figuring out what kind of mechanics would be fun. We also receive lots of feedback from the community there, and then we try to fit fit the new enemy into the whole theme and world afterwards. But then sometimes it also goes the other way around. For example, in the third map, in the ice map. Sorry, little spoiler here. If you haven't played the game yet and don't want to be spoiled at all, maybe skip the next minute. On the ice map, there is this kind of like boss monster that in the last night kind of appears from the depth of the lake. And this, for example, was definitely fantasy first, and then we thought of how it could interact on a mechanical layer with the world. But we definitely knew we wanted to have this cool monster appearing out of the lake. So yeah, it's sometimes the one, sometimes the other way around, but usually it's mechanics first.
So how do you end up coming up with the aesthetics for Thronefall?
Oh, that was actually a hard fight because, as I mentioned, we used to be 3 people at Grizzly Games, and for the games we did previously, usually Friedemann, the friend of us who eventually left the company, was was the person responsible for the visual development, and he's like a really talented artist, a fantastic illustrator. He really knows his way around there, and that's a talent both of us, Jonas and me, lack, unfortunately. So when we started developing Thronefall, we were kind of afraid of the whole art and visual development part of the game, and it was then like mostly trial and error at the beginning of the project. We knew we needed an art style that was both very readable, because that is like obviously the most important requirement from the gameplay perspective, is that players very easily can understand what's happening, especially in the midst of battle where there are many units and many things happening at one time. You still want to have like a very clear image of what's happening. And the second is that it has to be achievable by Jonas and me and our very limited art skills. So we then kind of like stuck with this flat shaded look, because it it provided both very clear shapes that were distinguishable even in the heat of battle, and more importantly, it also allowed us to throw very well, how do I to phrase this, very cheap 3D models into the scene. Like if you could see the raw geometry of the models, they're just not very detailed, but because of the flat shading, most of the detail of the models gets lost anyway, and they're like kind of just colored shapes. They merge into each other, which allows for very sloppy 3D modeling. And well, yeah, it was kind of a requirement because none of us is a good 3D modeler. So yeah, it was born out of necessity, I'd say, the whole art style.
Did you have like a kind of idea of how you were going to approach the art style, or did you just go in blind and mess with like shader options?
I was a fan of flat shading because I used a similar style for my previous game, The Ramp, and there I had a similar problem to solve, and so that was definitely an option from the beginning on. But we then I remember we both took a couple of days to just experiment with different ideas. And then the flat shading one was just kind of like the most feasible because we didn't need any textures for that. The models could be super simple. It was very readable. And yeah, I think from there on we just decided to go with it.
One thing that surprised me was when I got killed. Usually when I play these types of games, I just kind of expect to start all the way from the beginning, but from here I was able to like repeat my day, and I was like, oh, so now let me experiment with a different strategy to see if I could win. What was your thought process behind adding that as a feature?
Um, well, when the game launched originally in early access, there was no save feature at all because we didn't have the time during development. And just wanted to get the game out there and played by people as quickly as possible. So we decided to just launch it. And back then, when you failed, you just had to start all over again. But obviously, that was not the way we intended Thronefall to be played. We definitely wanted to include an option to save the game, especially for the longer sittings and the later levels where you might play for an hour or so. You definitely want the option to leave in between and come back and continue your session. And with that decided, and we also figured out that you then, I mean, what you described, the ability to restart your day once you implement a save system, you have this one way or another. The question is just, are you embracing it, and are you making this feature accessible for people, or do you force them to kind of like save scam their way there, like, or just save and load again until they are successful? And I mean, kind of in match to the general design philosophy of accessibility I mentioned earlier, this is yeah, we have the same attitude there, that we just want to make the game as fun and as accessible to all players, and this is why we try to be well, as gentle and as forgiving as we can be. And well, I think in Thronefall the fun challenge comes from this process of experimenting with different perks, different weapons, different strategies, and that's definitely something we want to embrace and motivate players to do. And I would say if we would make the whole experience of losing and restarting frustrating, then we would punish this behavior.
One thing that helps with experimentation is having varied maps. And there's a few stages so far that have been created. How do you end up creating what you would call a fun map?
Well, that again is mostly Jonas's responsibility at the moment, but I do think I can give some insight into the process. First of all, we try to introduce something new with each map, so you don't have the feeling of just repeating basically the same thing over and over again, just in a different skin. So there's usually a new idea that gets explored in every map. For example, the first map is completely flat and is basically a flat plain with just a river and some mountains around it, but the whole gameplay is pretty much happening on a flat plane. Now with the second level, we try to introduce different height levels. So there are those slopes and narrow passageways that lead from one plateau to another. And then with the fourth level, for example, we have this huge open space that allows for, well, very very tactical battles, because you really have to think about where to position your units. So that's the first element, I think. We want to really introduce something new with every new level. And then, well, I think from there on, it's just pretty much experimenting with the kind of build order and placement of the different buildings. I mean, compared to other strategy games where you would usually, I guess, just design an interesting environment and then maybe like try to balance the placement of different resources or choke points. With Thronefall, a lot depends on the pre-made structure of buildings you can build and the order in which you unlock them. So that's where then most of the design process is really trying to come up with an arrangement of all those different buildings that is fun and also gives enough opportunity for experimentation, so you don't feel like you're just going through the motions and just buy one building after another. Like, we really want to provide players with the feeling of having choice.
And you guys have a pretty big system of I would say like a meta progression, as you have like various unlocks when it comes to perks, weapon abilities, and even then you have I guess you can challenge the gods on top of it. What was your idea behind adding that meta progression with unlocks instead of just granting all the tools for the players to use at first, if you want to be able to have as much experimentation as possible?
Yeah, we kind of try to strike a balance there between not overwhelming new players. Again, speaking of accessibility, so we kind of try to limit the options in the beginning. And then also, it's kind of fun to unlock and get a reward for a successful beat of a level. But we definitely try to not make it like grindy, where you feel like you just have to play over and over and over again to unlock the content. I mean, this is also still subject to discussion. Like, we're trying to work there with the community, really, because I mean, it's not our intention to make people just spend a lot of time with the game. We just try to not overwhelm them in the beginning, and then have the fun of unlocking new options over the course of the game. And then, well, the idea of having all those different perks is obviously just feeding into the same theme of exploration of different strategies. We try to just make the most of the limited amount we especially had when we originally launched the game in early access. So I would say the perks really add to the replayability, because you can have like a completely different experience based on the weapon and perks and playstyle you choose. And then the last aspect you mentioned, the kind of like challenge the gods, the kind of mutators we call them, who which make the game intentionally more difficult, but also reward you with more experience and more a higher score if you try to beat the level with mutators. That was mostly to bridge a gap between very experienced strategy players that found the vanilla game too easy, and still having the game being accessible for new players and less experienced players. And I think it's always more fun to kind of intentionally pick the game to be more difficult than beat it, compared to kind of like, you know, picking the easy mode, because it always kind of like is not such a great feeling, because then when you beat the game you feel like, yeah, but I mean, I beat it on the easy mode. I didn't beat the real game, you know.
And then on top of all that, then you've also added quests. What was your thought process behind adding those?
Um, yeah, I mean, in the beginning, I think it was just a kind of desperate way to extend the play time that we had for for the early access launch, because we knew we couldn't provide a very large amount of levels. We still wanted to give players that wanted to stick around longer something to do in the game, and just something to achieve beyond just beating the levels. And I think the ways the challenges are structured, or the quests, also invites experimentation with the different perks and strategies.
So, are you at all worried about when you make a new map that some players may either not have the perks required to help them do it, or that some players may find perks and that they'll just breeze through one of the maps and no problem? Like, how do you think about that as a concept?
Um, well, first of all, we usually not try to make any perks necessary to beat a map, and we also try to balance them evenly. So the perks you unlock later in the game, they just offer a different way of playing the game, and sometimes a way where the skill ceiling is a bit higher to use, maybe. This also goes for the weapons you unlock. Like the bow and arrow weapon you have in the very beginning is probably the most reliable, but also the one that scales the least with the skill. And then with the magic staff thing, for example, that is very skill based, can be super strong, but it's also not too useful if you're not experienced in the game. So the same goes for the perks, and we try to balance them in a way that they are equally strong. So we just try to make them all worthwhile picks. And I mean, there are very few perks that just have some that just have no use in some maps. For example, the perk that makes your mills stronger, or your fields, that obviously doesn't have any use on the ice map where there are no mills and fields. But besides that, we just try to have them very evenly balanced.
And who designed the music? Because that shit is a banger. Like when I first booted up the menu, I was like, I'm ready. I'm ready to slay some hordes.
And it's great to hear. That was Jonas's part, and I will gladly forward that to him.
So, how did you guys know that it's time to release the game for early access? Because I imagine you want to have enough content for people to be content, but also you got to start getting that feedback before you get further into development.
Um, yeah, you summarized that perfectly, I think. That was also something we just thought a lot about. And we usually try to just keep the development cycle of our projects rather short. So Thronefall is by far the longest project, especially with the early access period now we've worked on. And well, at some point we just got really, we just really wanted to see people play the game because, I mean, we don't have any QA or anything, so we had very little feedback besides the feedback we got from friends. We basically never saw people play the game, and we really felt it was time to have people getting their hands on it. And so we tried to kind of figure out what would be the smallest package we can ship, and this then was pretty much the early access release. And we just tried to communicate very clearly what you get if you buy the game at this stage, and also obviously adjust the price tag accordingly. So we tried to give it a very small price, and then just very clearly tell people that it's a tiny game at this stage, and we value their feedback very much. And it has been a great experience because I think we wouldn't have been able to balance the game this well and incorporate that much of the community feedback, obviously, if we hadn't done the whole early access thing.
Were you guys always planning for Thronefall's development to be this long, or is it naturally just turned into this longer project than you have normally built?
No, that is definitely something that happened naturally, and we also kind of tried to keep the early access period kind of flexible. So if it were a complete flop and nobody would have played the game, then we probably would have tried to wrap things up rather quickly, because then there wouldn't have been a point in um, well, developing it further for so long. But now that the response has been so wonderful, it's obviously very fun and motivating to just keep working on it. And that's why we also don't really have a set release deadline for now. There's just still many things we want to see in the game, so just gonna see how long it takes us.
You know, with how many games get released in early access every year on Steam, do you wonder that there's ever like a really good game that had the potential to be developed across 3 years, but there wasn't a reaction to it, so it got finished really quickly to get moved on to the next project?
Uh, yeah, I guess there are quite a lot of those. I mean, it's so tough to get some visibility on Steam, and I would say especially with early access, the initial launch is probably a huge a huge factor when it comes to the further development of the game. It's just so much more motivating, I think, if people are playing a game and if there's an active community around it.
Have there been any really big mistakes or things that you've learned from early access that you went into going forward with Thornfall?
Um, I think fortunately there haven't been very big mistakes. But what we learned kind of halfway through the development of early access was that it's very it's a very good idea to have a kind of like beta branch to test out new updates before you release them into the wild, because yeah, once the game is live, it is live, and if you update the game that are I don't know, that has 20,000 daily users, then if you break something, it's suddenly very broken for a lot of people. So that made updating the game quite stressful in the early with the early updates, and then at some point we kind of introduced this beta branch where we usually roll out new updates a couple of days before they go live on the main branch, and then we announce that on the Discord, and we also gather feedback there, so we can fix the worst bugs before we release the game. We'll release the update actually on the live branch.
So I know with Steam you can download the beta branches and they give you that warning of like, hey, this is a beta of the game, so things might not be. Does every launcher have that as a feature when it comes to um, early access games, or do you think that other platforms need to introduce that more as a feature?
Um, well, I mean, it depends. I would say for games that are not in early access anymore, it's not that important, I guess. And I'm not sure if there are any platforms besides Steam that have a similar program ongoing compared to early access. But if they have, they definitely should have the beta branch option as well.
And what have been some big design decisions that have been made partially because of the community that you guys have fostered helped you guys decide that's where you wanted to go?
Um, well, definitely the whole design around the saving games and restarting days thing we talked about earlier. And then also I think the endless mode that is part of the game now is mostly came from community suggestions.
And do you have any sneak peeks of future development that you want to leak here potentially?
Well, I mean, there is a new map in the works right now that will release maybe, I mean, ideally in a week from now, maybe 1.5 weeks or two even, depends on how things go, especially in the beta branch as well. But yeah, it's definitely going to introduce some uh, completely new things to the game. There's going to be a new weapon. There's going to be several new enemy types, and well, also a new level that has some surprises in it that only well, they're only going to be revealed over the course of the playthrough, which is also something quite new, I think.
How do you design new weapons for Thronefall to help them all feel distinct from one another?
Well, it's similar to the enemies. Usually, it's mechanics first, and then we try to integrate it into the world. And usually, it's also a design process in synergy with designing a new level and a new enemy types, because they usually um, get released as a package. You know, it's the new weapon that gets introduced, and there are those new enemy types, and they come with a new level. And yeah, for example, the ice map where we have those larger swarms of smaller creatures, which puts you in a situation where you really face big numbers of not so strong individually enemies. Um, there's also this new weapon of the broadsword that you unlock roughly around the time you unlock the level. And broadsword, for example, has an active ability that allows to really like kind of does this area of effect damage, which allows targeting many enemies that stand close together at once. So we usually try to come up with a meaningful synergy between new enemies and the new weapon.
So I think that about answers all the questions I've got for Thronefall. So Paul, is there anything that you want to shout out while you're on the podcast, whether it's any links to social media or I had one person shout out a local pizza place?
Well, definitely shout out to the university we studied at. It's the HCW in Berlin. And I think it's a great option for anyone who's based in Germany or also, I guess, all countries around Germany. It's not limited to German students. That was definitely the greatest starting point to our game design and game development journey. And then also, of course, shout out to everybody who has been part of the development of Thonefall, all the friends, family, and also the great early access community who's really, helping shaping the game to be the best game we can make it.
Is there a Discord for Thronefall?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
So make sure to look in the description down below. I'll have the links to Thronefall. I'll have a link to the development studio's Twitter as well as the Discord. And if you want to reach out to me or say hello or anything about the episode, I am on Twitter, Threads, and Blue Sky. As well as there's a LinkedIn below if you want to find all of that, including a Ko-Fi in case you want to donate to help keep the podcast alive. And I think that's everything. So we'll see you guys on the next episode of the Paper Prototypes podcast. Bye!